Right. So, we're still going through Hebrews. We didn't make it last week to 11. I think today might actually be a little bit short just because I was looking at jumping into 11 as well, and I couldn't do it. There's just so much to do when you get into 11, just even the first verse of chapter 11. So I was like, we got to save that for next week. So we'll see how things go, but we are in Hebrews chapter 10 verses 35. That's where we ended last week. Last week we were looking at just this interesting notion that it turns out if you want to be a follower of Jesus, you should expect some hardship. And so the author of Hebrews was talking about that and talking about how they were persecuted. And excuse me, one of the other things that was pretty neat about that was how the expectation is we're not necessarily doing all of this alone. We're not meant to go through all of this hardship alone, but we're supposed to be doing it with other people and encouraging them and being encouraged by them. And so that's where we were at last week. This week he's gonna focus, the author of Hebrews is gonna focus more on the rewards sides of thing, which is which is pretty exciting. It's pretty neat. So we're gonna look through that. So we'll start in Hebrews 10, and we'll start with verse 35 and 36. Tim, would you mind reading 35 and 36?
So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. You need to preserve so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised.
So it starts off with yours says, "Do not throw away." Is that what it said?
Yeah, NIV.
Yeah, yeah. And mine says do not cast, but I like this either way. This is this great picture here that I keep wanting to say Paul, but we don't know. The author of Hebrews says, which is that he starts this by don't throw away your confidence. And I love this picture because he's not saying don't let somebody steal it from you, don't let somebody take it from you. The idea here is that that's not a thing that is possible, right? This is a thing where you could just throw it away yourself. You could just cast it away. And so here he's saying, don't do that. Hold on to your confidence. Don't just cast it away. And I just like that whole picture of that it's within our charge. It's ours to hold on to. And if we hold on to it, it'll stay ours. But if we don't, we can just throw it away. And so I like that whole idea here that he's saying, do not cast away your confidence. And again, just to just to I just love this. It's the idea, right, that God's got a hold of us. He's with us. He's not leaving us. He's our confidence. He's not going to just forsake us and abandon us. Instead, it is this idea that you could cast it away. So he says, don't cast away your confidence. What do you think he's talking about when he says your confidence?
Trust. Don't cast away your trust in God. Don't
Okay.
turn your back on your faith in God.
Could also mean perseverance, just to keep going.
Okay.
But the only way you can do that is through faith and trust.
Yeah.
I look at it like, don't forget. We're confident because we have either experienced something or we remember something or we know something that gives us that confidence or that security or that assurance, so to speak. And so if we throw it away, then we'll forget everything that got us to where we were, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it reminds me a lot of when our children go off to college or they leave home and they're raised in a Christian family, and then they get all these different doctrines, and suddenly worshiping God is not a priority to them. And what they've done is they've cast away their faith in God. And you just pray continually that your kids won't do that. And your grandkids.
I think of when Peter got out of the boat and he was walking in confidence on the water until he saw the tribulation around him. And I think that's what is happening with these guys. They're getting and persecution and all these other things, and they're losing their confidence in Christ, just as Peter did. And he lost his confidence or trust in the Lord, and he started
Yeah.
sinning. And I think that's what we're looking at, is the confidence that we have in Christ to continue on, even though the struggles or the things going around the world we have no control of.
So in verse 35, he says, therefore, do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward. And that's also an interesting phrase. He's saying that don't cast away your confidence, but your confidence has a great reward. What do you think he's talking about here? What is this reward that he's bringing up?
I'd say life eternal with Jesus.
Okay.
Say peace of mind. Just
All
right
right.
where you're going. If you know that God's in control, doesn't matter what's going to happen around you. You just know that he's, I don't know, it's just different. Knowing that God's in control makes everything different.
If you look at it in the context of the paragraph, the previous verses, there's a lot of suffering and persecution. So it could be directly related to your rewards will be no more persecution and suffering.
Yeah.
It's nice that Jesus experienced those things too.
Right.
So he knows what we're going through because he went through it himself.
Yeah. It's just an interesting thing. I'm not sure that it's super clear what he's talking about. So I just find this interesting. This idea here that they're having this confidence has great reward. And maybe also, maybe there's like, I liked what Sean said about Peter walking on the water. Walking on the water is also a pretty cool reward, right? I wonder if there's this idea that if you have confidence and put your confidence in the Lord, you're going to see some amazing things happen just because that's the way the Lord works. And maybe even it'll seem small to other people, but you're going to be like, oh man, God's really taking care of things, right? He's in control. So I wonder if some of it is that. I'm not sure. This is all good stuff.
Good thing
But it's
we covered this after John's cruise.
that's right. That's right. So it's just a good. I just like the idea here, though, that there is reward in keeping hold of your confidence. There is a reward in that, and we've talked about here just a few things that are rewarding, but I'm not sure that that's even a full comprehensive list. There's just so many ways that that putting our trust and our confidence in the Lord has rewards. So it's good.
Now, and when you have confidence that God's going to take care of you, like Dan was saying, if you have that confidence, you're actually looking for the things where God's hands is upon it. And it actually grows your faith,
Yeah.
because then you can step out even more. And I think that's the great reward, because Jesus told us that we would do more than he did
Yeah.
as he walked on the earth. And I think
Yeah.
that it's walking in that confidence. And I think when you walk in confidence, you're looking for where God is or where God's working. And
Yeah.
that's really kind of neat, because it draws you to that. So you want to continue on it and through faith.
That is a good point, and that takes us into verse 36. So let's read. Or I just want to look at 36 too. It says, "For you have need of endurance, so that after you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise." And I like this because what Sean was talking about, I think there's an aspect of endurance here, and we don't want to miss that. And I think endurance is funny. It's one of those skills that might be what's the word I'm looking for? Underrated? that people are just like, endurance, that's not the thing I want to work on. But it's just it's an interesting thing. I want to bring up something that's interesting about endurance is it is relative. And you might be like, what? What does that mean? I'll give you an example. Actually, I have a whole bunch of examples written down, but let me give you one, at least one. And that is, let's say you have a 4-year-old and you tell your 4-year-old, okay, in 10 minutes, we're going to go, we're going to go have some ice cream or we're going to do something special, but you have to wait for 10 minutes. If you're a 4-year-old kid, 10 minutes is such a long time, right? And like them having to endure 10 minutes, you can say after that, okay, you endured, that was a good job. Okay. But if you're an adult, 10 minutes is nothing, right? If you say you have to endure 10 minutes before anything, I mean, it could be like, let's say you have a kidney stone, you have to endure kidney stones for 10 minutes and then you're going to be okay. I'd be like, okay, I could do that. That's not a big deal. And it's just interesting that there's this relativistic side of endurance, which is that our experience can change what we think of as enduring. And it's just a really interesting. I want to give you one other example, just real quick. Let's say that you tell somebody that they have to run for 5 miles. They have to run 5 miles straight. Now, if a person is out of shape, they don't exercise, they might be thinking in their head, that's impossible. I cannot run 5 miles. That's just not possible. But if you were to ask somebody who regularly runs, maybe they're in marathons all the time, and you say, okay, I need you to run 5 miles, they'd be like, okay, yes, no problem, I can do that. And it's just interesting how, again, there's an endurance aspect to this, which it is different for each of us. There might be something that I have to endure where you might look at it and go, that's no problem. And then at the same time, if I look at what you have to endure, I might say, that's no problem. But what I have to endure, oh man, this is tough. Why do you think this is? Why do you think it is that that endurance is kind of relative?
I think God gives us all gifts and attributes that help us hopefully to serve him. I think about we're all made for a specific purpose, and things that are easy for one are difficult for others. I know my wife says all the time she could never do my job and have to deal with kids all day, and I could never do her job and be in front of the computer and be inside all day. I couldn't do it. And so I guess we are specific for our specific tasks.
And also that goes back to the reward. So if you're running 5 miles for ice cream, that's a different story.
That is true. That is true. And let's talk about the promise side of this. But before we do that, I just want to point out that endurance is one of those things where if we endure something, the next time we know we can do it, and it's usually not as hard to endure it the second time. And we can actually push ourselves a little bit further, or God can push us a little bit further. And then we can have another thing that's going to push us a little bit further. And it's just this thing where we can actually exercise in endurance and get better at it, because the more we accomplish, the more we can see that we can accomplish, and we can do that. So it's just an interesting aspect of endurance that we have to keep in mind, that something that seems impossible, actually, I should rephrase that. We can do things now that probably seem impossible to us 20 years ago, right? And that's just the way that we grow in these things. So it's just an interesting aspect.
I
Building
think
upon, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead, John.
I was gonna say,
Finish your
just
thought.
building upon previous experiences gives you confidence to be able to go and move forward, and grows that faith as well, right? You see what God has done in the past, and you look back on it and lets you know that, hey, he's with me, he'll be with me. I could persevere and get through this. Think about moving Williams down to Arizona. I didn't know that you could drive for 50 hours and then move somebody and not kill them. And, but now I know I could do anything.
Yeah, I think what goes along, sorry, Dan, what goes along with that, you think about endurance and how important it is to have people in your life No, that's another interesting component of it, that it's able to help push you beyond what you thought was possible. It's really interesting. In this case, I mean, it doesn't have to be a particular person, because you have the best helper you can have in the Holy Spirit. Because having a person that, in this case, let's say you think about an example like a coach, a strength coach, an endurance coach, a conditioning coach, whatever. They've seen all kinds of shapes and sizes, pushed through all kinds of different things. And that's why when they assign you whatever it is that you are in need of, if you will, they say, you want to get there, you got to get this. And you're like, that's impossible. No, it's not. You because they've seen it and they coach you through it. It's a very different thing than if you were just trying yourself and said, okay, well, tomorrow I'm going to do 10 miles. Yeah, you're probably not going to make it because there's somebody that's able to coach you through a lot of that stuff. And of course, I'm putting it in a very specific context, in the sense that the Lord says, hey, I know what you can bear. I'm not going to give you anything beyond what you can bear. And that's a really important thing to help us have in mind, knowing that in this case, God, it's not just regular Joe Schmo, your friend, who just is saying this to encourage you, but there is someone that knows what their grace and mercies are capable of, that enables us to push beyond. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And that's the confidence. Well, I have a God that knows that what he's putting me through, allowing me to go through, it seems impossible, but it's important that this is his design, his sovereign will that puts us through this. And that's way better than us setting some arbitrary goal in which we don't know whether we can actually achieve, like climb Mount Fuji in the back of John's, you know. So something like that. It's a little different when we're setting it versus somebody that knows what's possible and coaches us through it.
Yeah, did you want to say something? Okay. You bring up another good point too, which is the how helpful other people can be in helping you endure. We don't realize how much encouragement we can encourage other people to endure. I don't know if you ever done this. Probably John has. I know my dad has. But if you're trying to encourage a kid to do a pull up, right, and they're like, I can't do it, and then you're just like, here, let me help you, and you just stick your hands on them, and you're not even pushing, then suddenly they're like, okay, I can do it, and they can pull themselves up. And it's not like you're actually pushing them, you're just encouraging them to say, hey, yeah, you can do it. And we can all get in this, we're all like that, where sometimes we just seems like we can't do it, and if somebody encourages us, it can really help us to keep enduring and do something we didn't even think we could do. So
If
it's just cool. Go ahead.
if someone's done it and they know what they're talking about, that's a huge encouragement.
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
mean, I remember when I was an intern and we used to have to work 24 to 36 hours straight. And all the residents who'd gone through that would say, okay, this is what you do, this is how you get through this. And they'd be encouraging because they've done it themselves. They did it a year or two ago. So they made it through and they told us how we could make it through. And if you have someone helping you who knows what they're talking about because they've done it, that's a huge help.
Yeah.
Just like counseling, if someone has been an alcoholic, they're going to be able to tell you what they went through and how to beat it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction, because I think too many people focus on the people that haven't done it and said, oh, well, they failed, so therefore I can't do that, or I've never seen that work. But they've stopped listening to the people that have pushed through a lot of things. It doesn't matter what it is. The influence around us. I'm not talking about positive thinking. I'm talking about real experiences as far as what God has helped people, and how much the grace of God can overcome a lot of the difficulties in life. Because I think that's really, really important to that's why we need to be listening and in fellowship and encouragement, because often it's those stories that say, okay, well, if God did it for him, it's recorded for a reason that we can go forward. But a lot of people spend too much time thinking about the failures or thinking about the people that have said, nah, that can't be done. Because obviously a lot of people have failed all kinds of things, marriages or resisting temptation or enduring whatever it is. And a lot of people will just say, nah, that's not me. I can't do that. And they're probably right. The fact that if our confidence is in ourselves, we couldn't do even close to some of these things that God's expecting of us. But yet you listen and hear the testimonies that happen because of what God does through other people. I think those are the guys you want to pay attention to. What did the Lord do that they're able to push through that? And we have to seek that out when we're in the same situations. I think we will find so much more things and learn from it rather than just kind of give in to, 75% of people can't get through this. Okay, well, it's okay that I'm part of the 75.
This discussion, I was just going to say, this discussion and these verses really set up chapter 11. And what Rich just said, I mean, the Hall of Faith, we see all those failures and we see all those knuckleheads, and they're all blessed because of God.
And I think you're looking at this whole verse together.
Right.
It says the endurance so that if you do the will of God, and I think that's what the author's talking about is they're having to endure through the persecution because they're doing what God has called them to do.
Yeah.
And that I think is a distinction here because, you can endure all these physical things, but we're talking about the true, how we are as Christians enduring the persecution. And I think that it says that after you've done the will of God. And so that's what I think he's encouraging them to persevere and endure through doing God's will. And that's, I think, the important thing is not just, that we have to be doing God's will, because we can also need endurance not doing God's will because of the things going on around the world.
Yeah. And there's plenty of people who will encourage us to do that as well. But you're right, and I think this is a key aspect to endurance, which is what he's bringing up in this second part. And this is what I would call perspective, and that is not only why are you doing it, but what's the point? And as Sean just mentioned, it is so that after you've done the will of God, there's this idea here that you're enduring because you're following God's plan. And that's part of it. Part of it is that's worth it, right? But then also he says that you may receive the promise. And so again, there's a perspective shift where we have to sometimes look at this and say, okay, I'm not doing this because I want to make life easy for myself. I'm not doing this for this reason or this reason. I'm doing this because this is God's plan and this is his will, and I trust him. I know that his will is best. And I think this also helps us tremendously in our endurance, right? If we are trying to do something and there's no reward at the end of it, or there's no point, then why am I want to keep trying? But if there's a reward, or even if we don't even really see the reward, but we know there's a purpose to it, then we're willing to do that. There's this great example in the early American history. The Pilgrims, they come to the United States, or they come not to the United States, they come to North America. And when they get to North America, they don't really know how to do much in anything. They've never been in North America. They don't know how to grow food. They don't know how to do all of this stuff. And so they get there, and this first winter is just terrible. It is horrendous. More than half of them die. Women would freeze to death in the middle of the night over their children, trying to keep their children warm. It was just a really horrible thing. And it starts to get warm enough, or the winds are changing, or whatever it is, so that the boats can go back to Europe. And the captain is like, hey, you guys are going to all die. You need to come with me. You need to come back to Europe. And they're like, no, we're not going, because we're we know that this is tough. We know we may die, but we're doing this so that our children and the generations after that can worship God in this particular manner. And there's this great document where they wrote something that was saying that. They're like, we are the stepping stones of future generations so that they can follow after God like we are. We're willing to lay our lives down. And so there's just great thing here that they've done, and it's all perspective. They were willing to endure because they recognized the reward that could come from it. They were willing to recognize that they weren't doing it for nothing. There was a point, there was the will of God that was wrapped up in all of this. And so this is one of those things that we need to remember as well. We want to follow God's plan because He's got a plan that's much bigger than each of us. He's willing to use us. It's incredible, but it's an amazing thing that He wants to do. So it's just I don't know. What do you guys think about this? I find this exciting. I think this is one of those things where this is hard to keep in your forefront of your mind, but it's something that's critical in order to endure. What do you guys think?
Well, I think people run faster when they're being watched. If you're being watched and you know you're being watched, then it's easier to endure something because you're being held accountable by a crowd of witnesses. If you have a future, like those pilgrims you were talking about, they had a future in sight. And they were enduring for that future. And I think a lot of parents do that with their kids. They endure certain hardships so that they're with the idea that their kids are going to come out better, or they're not going to have to endure these hardships themselves. And I'm just rumbling.
I think, you hear the expression standing on the shoulders of giants. You think about the people that went before you, what they had to suffer and endure just for you to have what you have.
Amen.
Thinking about even the roads that weren't built that we get to drive on so easily. You think about the pioneers that went through and settled the land, and it wasn't easy, but they did it because they saw, the posterity, right? But then you think about Jesus and the opportunity to share that with the future generations. And you think about what people are willing to go through, whether they're doing Bible studies in caves or secret codes or whatever they have to do. We have the opportunity to do it right here in front of everybody. I think if anything, it's a call to all of us to really step our game up and bring the gospel out more. That's a message that I got from this. Thinking about the pilgrims and those that went before, what they were willing to endure. I think that's part of it too. When everything is easy, it's easy to be a Christian when the weather's great and you're being blessed. But what about when you're suffering and going through it? That's when you really need to dig down and think about that promise and understand that this is the will of God that you have given. This is your plan, God. And yeah, it sucks, but I'm gonna embrace the suck and I'm gonna persevere and I'm gonna endure. And you know what? That's the plan you have for me, God.
When John said the weather's great, that made me think of the phrase fair weather Christian.
Yeah.
So it does test us. And ultimately, when you get through the other side, it strengthens your faith.
Right, like Rich said earlier, he's not going to give us anything we can't bear. Might feel like it.
Yeah. Well, he ends that verse 36. He says, what does he say? So that after you've done the will of God, you may receive the promise. So let's talk a little bit about the promise, but the way my Bible is structured, there's a little colon there, indicating that these next verses talk about the promise. So let's read verses 37 and 38 and then talk about what do you think this promise is? Dad, do you mind reading verse 37 and 38?
No, I'll read them. For yet a little while, And he who is coming will come and will not tarry. Now the just shall live by faith. But if anyone draws back, my soul has no pleasure in him.
So what do you think is this promise that he's talking about? We receive this promise if we endure. What do you think that is?
Well, he's gonna come again. He's not gonna, he's gonna be there and we're gonna have that eternal life with Jesus Christ. He's
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
be there with us.
I don't know about you, but I'm excited about that. Right? That's come today. Let's do it. I'm up for it. And I know, he might not today might not be the day. He's got plans. He wants to save other people. I'm down with that too. But if he wants to come today, let's do it.
That's why he tells us that we need to have patience. Gotta have
Yeah.
patience. It's on his time, not ours, right?
Any other thoughts about what the promise could be? Is that the only promise that you think he's talking about here?
I mean, contextually, we studied Habakkuk, right? Or Habakkuk, or however you guys,
Yep.
or Habs. I've never heard that. And it's, I mean, we remember the context, right? He was saying, God saying things, and he was like, "What? What are you doing? How can this be the plan?" And so we see the context of, you mean we've got to suffer this? This has to be part of it, so that
Yeah.
you're gonna bring about what you said you would bring about. And it was almost an unbelievable thing that God even had to say to him, well, even if I were to tell you, you wouldn't believe me anyway. I mean,
That's right.
so it's really interesting context to put that into the New Testament thing about enduring this trial, enduring this will of God that he has designed to happen to bring about an end, of which he promises, I know what I'm doing. The just shall live by faith. And if you go back to Habakkuk, that verse, the contrast in Habakkuk 2:4 was, behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him, but the just shall live by faith. The opposite side of that is the person that says, no, look, God, you don't know what you're talking about. I don't have to go through this. And I don't, and this contrast of, instead of just trusting that the Lord has ways beyond what we can understand, we resist sort of this thing and have this proud disposition, whereas the humble is the one that says, okay, Lord, I'll trust you. And it's just, when you put all that together, it's like, wow, it's still at the end, and this leads up, of course, to Hebrews 11, which is, we just have to trust God for what he's doing. But yeah, I think in context is the salvation of the goodness of God, the plan that he has to come. And of course, we know what that means later. But I think it's just what God wants to accomplish in your life, probably in that sense that could be applied. But yeah, I think overall context is the overall salvation and the overall plan that God has, that sometimes, requires us to suffer a little, according to his words.
Well, I think this phrases that we're looking at here is, these verses are, the promise is judgment. Which side do you want to be on? And that's really what it is. It's contrasting. You can be on this side or you can be on this side. And it says, here's what's going to happen. He's going to come, and you want to be on the good side, because the part of 38 says, but if anyone draws back, I take no pleasure in him. There is contrast there. There's a good, you can do it the good way or the bad way. And which way do you want to be judged? And that's what I think, that's what the promise is there will be judgment, and you need to decide on which way you want to be.
I think there's another. Oh, no, go ahead, Bill.
Well, adversities in our life are a test of faith.
And that's kind of what I was going to say. I think there's another aspect of this, which is not only, as Sean mentioned, is there going to be this judgment, and we want to know what side we're going to be on, but it's, our lives are designed so that we can actually be confident on which side we're going to be on, because when we've gone through the trials, did we put our trust in God? Then what does it say? The just will be, or the just will live by faith. Do you want to know if you're justified? Well, did you put your trust in God, or did you try to take care of it and do it yourself? So there's this other aspect of it where God is saying, you're going to have these trials, you're going to have these endurance, and when you're done, you're going to know if you put your trust in him or not. And so I like this aspect of it too. So there's, we can we can get in this mindset of, am I saved or am I not saved? But here's where it comes down to: is your trust in God? Did you put your trust in him? And this is an exciting thing, because this is a knowable thing. We are going to go through trials. We are going to go through hardships. And when we are going through it, it's going to be clear in your heart, are you putting your trust in God or are you not? And I like that. I like when we look at Matthew and we look at how Jesus is talking about, hey, there's going to be people who say, Lord, Lord, I did this in your name and I did that in your name. And Jesus is going to say, I didn't know you. But here's where it comes down to: did you put your trust in him? And we know when we're going through these hardships, is that what's driving us? Is it really God who's driving us through these? And I know that confidently some of us can say, absolutely, that's I know that I put my trust in him. And so this is a cool aspect of him. And this is the testing, as Bill was saying. It's not a test where like God is saying, I'm going to test you and you better pass. It is a testing of our own self. So when we're through, we know that we did it. We went through the endurance. And so this is a cool aspect of all of these things, which again makes it all worth it, right? It makes it worth it if we come out and we know, hey, I follow Jesus and I have put the proof is in the pudding in my life. I have followed him when it was hard. Um, there's a great outcome there.
And I've had non-believers say to me, you can't know that. How do you know that you're going to go to heaven? And question that.
I know that. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm going to heaven. I think that,
Yeah, and
it
they
says
think- And they think I'm crazy when I say that.
well, it says that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And some people are going to be, oh no, he really was Lord. And some people are going to be, yes, he was Lord. But they're all going to confess he was Lord.
Yeah. So I find these verses very encouraging, very much there's a reward here, and sometimes we can miss that, but I like the way that he's setting this up, which is perspective, right? If you have this perspective, you can endure. And we're going to hit chapter 11 soon and come out from with this big perspective, step back and see all of these examples, and it's encouraging. But before we did that, we still have one more verse. And so that's verse 39. And he says, but we are not of those who draw back to perdition, but of those who believe to the saving of the soul. And so when I read this verse, for me, I'm like, okay, this is a battle cry. This is the author saying, this is where we stand. And notice the way he says it. We are not of those who draw back to perdition. And I love that. He's gathering these Hebrews up with himself, and he's saying, we are not one of those people who are just going to reject Jesus and go back to our own way of doing things. And then he says, but we are those who believe to the saving of the soul. And so I like this. To me, this is that battle cry, that encouragement that you hear of, like, we are standing with the Lord, and you're like, yeah, I'm one of those. I'm standing with him. And so I like how this is all going. And we'll get more into Hebrews 10, not this week though, but I just love the encouragement of this whole thing. And so I just want us to kind of end on this idea that we need to remember that we need to endure and we need to have perspective, but also we need to encourage others to endure, and we need to be encouraged by others to endure, because it just makes things so much more easier. There are going to be times in our lives where we're going to have to go through a hardship, and you're going to be like, why am I going through that hardship? And maybe the reason is so that you can encourage somebody else when they have to go through that hardship. And that's a crazy way that God can work and do these things. But sometimes that's the way he does things. Sometimes, and often that's not the only way, right? Often he accomplishes multiple things at once. But one of those is we can encourage others who are going through hardships as well. So it's just this thing that we need to understand. We need to be involved in other people's lives on that aspect as well. Any thoughts? We're like I said earlier, we're gonna end a little bit earlier. It's a little bit short because there's just not gonna be enough time to jump into Hebrews 11. I don't want to do it with 10 minutes. So what
I
any,
guess,
any thoughts?
I
Go ahead,
had,
Bill.
for you, John, I had a musical thought. I remember when I was a little kid, we sang Onward Christian Soldiers.
Oh yeah.
Yes, marching us into war. Yeah, it's a battle.
Yep. I like a band called Pillar, and I don't like all of their stuff, just a few songs, but they have a couple that to me, when I listen to them, it's like that battle cry. It's like, okay, I'm marching forward, just like that Onward Christian Soldier song. Yeah.
Yeah.
So could this,
And-
so in my version, it says, but we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed. So I'm just, it's interesting to me that we're not promised not to have trials and tribulation, but we are promised not to be destroyed, and we don't see God's wrath as a believer, because and it says, comment, those who have faith are saved. So it's those who are not saved will see God's wrath, and so there's a difference between wrath and I guess punishment in what we see as Christians. We don't see God's wrath. We never see God's wrath.
And I think
Yeah,
it's an encouragement to everyone. Keep going, don't give up. You know, that's
Yeah.
this whole theme of what we're talking about today is don't give up, endure, persevere, go through this. And it's really about that, because he's gonna, like we're talking about in 11, he says, let me give you some examples. And we're gonna go through the examples. So he's kind of setting it up on, let's be encouraged, let's continue on and endure, because we know what's gonna happen at the end. That's the neat thing about, you know, if you play any sports, you don't know if you're gonna win or lose. But here, we know we win. We know the end of the story. And that's why he's saying you just gotta persevere and keep going. Don't give up. Don't go back to your old ways. Continue on. And that's really what I love about these verses is it's an encouragement to those of us that are battling out there.
And you bring up a good point too, Tim, which is it's not wrath. When we're going through these trials, we're going through these things. It's not that God is mad at us and it's all wrath and all of these things. At the very worst, it's going to be correction, right? It's going to be, okay, I'm trying to get you back into this direction so you're headed towards the prize. But much of it is going to be, you know, this is a struggle that you need to go through, which is going to test and you're gonna know that you're justified by faith. And so I think it's a good point. We're not seeing his wrath, and we're not going to, at least not on the side where we're experiencing it. But it's also there's this great encouragement, as Sean said. I love this, and I'm looking forward to chapter 11. There's a lot of really good, encouraging things in chapter 11 as well. I have no idea how long it's going to take us to get through that chapter, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think back to the things that I have had to endure as forms of correction. Excuse pardon. To bring me back on the path or in line to where I should be or where I needed to go. And while I was going through it, it was horrible and there was nothing fun, and you had to embrace the suck. But hindsight, you look back on it and it's everything, it's exactly what I needed at that time. And, you know, you look back and now my eyes are opened and I realize, you know, the things I was doing that I was so prideful about were horrible. And, you know, I shudder in the shower when I think about it. And I'm just so grateful that for the patience and grace that God has showed me and has allowed me to experience those things, and then to see the light and understand why I had to go through certain things, and then just to put me on the path where I am now. I think also without that testimony or without those opportunities, you know, how am I going to talk to the next person? Hey man, I used to do it too.
Yeah.
I was there too, but I changed and it's so much better. It's so much better now. But you have to persevere, endure, and not give up so that you can look back and see like, oh yeah, hey, thanks God. Thank you for putting me through that. Right at the time, you're just like, oh, why me? Oh, poor me. Well, cupcake.
It reminds me of a verse. It keeps bouncing around in my head, and I'm not even sure if it pertains, but it's Philippians chapter 3. And it says, yet indeed, I also count all things lost for the excellence of knowing Christ. Let's see, for the excellence of knowing, oh boy.
The excellence of the knowledge.
Yeah, okay, here it is. I was trying to do it off of memory and it's not working because my old memory just isn't what it used to be. But yet indeed, I count all things lost for the excellence of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish. Suffering the loss of all things and counting them as rubbish. They're not worth anything. Everything I've lost is not worth anything.
Yeah.
That I may gain Christ. What I get is worth everything that I've lost.
Yeah. And you can't take anything with you, so whatever you have on this earth means nothing.
And then even the loss of memory is called.
For you youngsters out there, appreciate your memory.
Oh, that's good. All right. Any more thoughts before we wrap it up?
I mean, I think we're going to see it in Hebrews 11, but when John was just sharing, you think about Romans, where Paul says, we know that God works all things for good to those that love him and are called according to his purpose. You know, it's one thing to endure the trials that God has apportioned for us and get through that, and because we know he's able to get it. But yet, you know, there's another aspect, and of course, this is always tricky. We failed many of those trials, but yet the grace of God still can work all through all that. And that's always a fine line, right? I mean, some of those things we didn't have to fail. We can't say, "Oh, I had to fail," because you know, because God meant for us to overcome that trial, and I failed. You know, and I see how many times I failed the same trial of the temptation, but yet God works that out, and it's a beautiful thing. And that's why I think we attribute all of that to grace and mercy, and you know, at the end, to see, and then probably to recall the greatness of the grace of God in heaven is going to be a beautiful thing to recognize. Man, he got me through a lot more than I recognized right at this moment.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's why Paul says what he says. He's like, at the end of the day, all of that's going to be, it's nothing compared to what's to come. And, you know, may the Holy Spirit sort of apply that, whatever we have to go through, failure or not, that the grace and mercies of God can save us, complete that work that he began, right? Philippians 1. He who began, you know, that work will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. So
All right. Well, I think that's a great way to finish it off. So we'll pray, and let's see. Who hasn't prayed in a while? Sean, would you mind praying for us?